Even if the elephant doesn't know and doesn't like that he's being called elephant, well, he's an elephant.
So how about atheists? Atheists.
Atheists, well, they also go to hell, so they are also Hindus. And indeed, in ancient India, atheism is a very important category. The different philosophies, Sankhya remains atheist. In fact, they make a distinction between Patanjali Yoga and Sankhya, even though their philosophical framework is the same, is Sankhya. But the difference is that Patanjali talks about Ishvara, about the Lord. And so they call Sankhya Nirishvara Sankhya, Sankhya without God, and yoga is then Seshvara Sankhya, Sankhya with Ishvara. But so Sankhya not. The original Nyaya Vaisheshika is atheist. As for Advaita Vedanta, today it will certainly not describe itself as atheist, but actually you can perfectly interpret it as atheist. Because Brahma, the Absolute, and Atma, the Self, are identical.
Yeah.
So there is nothing outside you that you can pray to. Right? That's why Advaita Vedanta is popular in the West. Because you have all these ex-Christians who have this hangover about worshipping God and so on. They don't want to be reminded of God, so they're not going to go elsewhere where they find the same God again. And so their interpretation of Advaita is legitimate, although in India now very rare. And as for Shankaracharya himself, who preached this Advaita, well, yes, on the one hand, he only speaks about, the consciousness, that's it. There's no God in there. Nevertheless, he's also credited with founding this system of 5 gods in a temple, one central deity and then 4 in the corners. So, that way you see theism coming up like in the Upanishads. God plays no role really in the old Upanishads. Then by the time you get to the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, that's very theistic. And so you see in philosophy that theism comes up and atheism disappears. Also helped by the fact that Buddhism disappears. And Jainism, of course, is resolutely atheistic, but it's a minority. And so today you can get the impression that Hinduism means theism. Indeed, very many Hindus are going to say, the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism is that they don't believe in God and we do. Well, it may be practical, to get around, but that's strictly not correct. So in Buddhism, you get a theist Buddhism, a popular Buddhism that worships the Buddha, though the Buddha didn't see himself as God at all, and in fact prohibited the worship of his own person. But so in Buddhism, you have the same evolution as in Hinduism, namely towards theism.
Theism, yeah.
And so you see this, an atheist view is somehow, difficult to sustain. And if you look at the life of people, typically they grow up with religion.
Yeah,
then when they're young, they throw it all out. Then when they grow old, they start, going to church again or whatever. So, atheism is it's like standing on the top of a mountain, and then when you come back from the mountain, it disappears. But so there is something to it, but really, if we're serious, I wouldn't simplify it like that.
I just want to add to that point, actually. So I wonder if Buddha knew that he was one of the avatars of Narayan, because he was one of the Dashavatars. So I'm not sure about that, because if Buddha was conscious enough to realize that, because other avatars of Narayan, like Ram and others, they actually were conscious at some point, or they were made conscious of it. Since you mentioned about Buddhism, and it's an offshoot of Hinduism, and Hinduism was not defined as Hinduism by then, right?
Mhm.
So during the Vedic time. So that was one observation, but also one about you mentioned about Parsis, right? So Parsis as Islamic, I'm not sure if that is the correct way of saying, because Parisians or Parsis, basically they actually were Parsis before pre-Islamic. Post-Islamic, they were Iranians, Islam. Before that, they were the followers of Zoroastrianism, which is more similar to pagan world or worshipping some idol gods, right? So they were more qualified to pagan worship than called Islamic, because the Islamic totally changed them, right? That was one observation. And when you said about RSS, Mohan Bhagwat said that India is a Hindu land. Could be one interpretation of that could be basically Hinduism, if you don't identify as a religion but as a way of living, the way it's not diktat, right? It's not dictated by one specific conduct. If you say as a way of life, how you how you offer the wisdom, how you so a Christian or Muslim could be a Hindu by a way of living life. And they
Well,
could
I mean,
practice their
I
own
know Christians who say, yes, but I'm also a Hindu. Yeah, it's a figure of speech, I suppose. But, I mean, if you really believe that Jesus is the only one, then you're not a Hindu. I mean, if you think that salvation lies in belief in Jesus and not in belief in Shiva, then I don't think you can call yourself a Hindu. If you're going to heaven, well, then you're not going to hell.
Well, what is the definition of Hindu then? Hindu is
Well,
one who believes in something, or
A Hindu is an Indian who goes to hell.
a non-believer like atheist could also be a Hindu, right? A non-believer like atheist.
Yeah,
could
they
be a
also
Hindu.
go to hell. You see, if you don't believe in Allah, then then you go to hell. It's simple.
Well, I think in Hinduism the concept of hell is not defined, right? I mean, it is moksha.
First of all, you can take the Christian or Islamic definition of hell. That will suit you quite well. You see, in Belgium, I mean, you have all these ex-Christians. And so some of them want to really affirm, you see, I am not one of your flock. And so they write to the bishops, okay, please scrap me from the baptism register. And the bishops write back, well, we can scrap you physically on a piece of paper, scrap your name, but that doesn't help. You see, by theological definition, baptism is irreversible. Once baptized, always baptized. And the fruit of baptism is that you go to heaven. So, you see, I like you people. So I'm going to take a very good look at you because I may never see you again. Because me, whatever I do, they'll take me up to heaven and you people are going to hell. So we may never meet again. But let me console you, you like it in hell. Yeah, of course. Because what is hell? You see, first of all, the landlord in hell is a guy with a trishul, Yeah. And moreover, what is happening in hell? Fire. It's an eternal Agnihotra. See? So you like it there. So, praise yourself that, you're kafirs. Okay.
So,
as for the Parsis, okay. This is your second question. Okay, the Parsis. Now, where exactly are they in the religious landscape? So they're very closely related to the Vedic people, but slightly different also. You see, the typical form of worship in India is to bring a sacrifice. Originally, either it is a bloody sacrifice, Pashu Bali, animal sacrifice, or it's a pouring sacrifice. That is to say, you take whatever represents the divine, a murti, or before that, some natural object, fire or whatever, and you pour something in it. You pour water over it, or in the case of Kali worship, You know, you cut a goat and the blood sprinkles on the murti, you know, or whatever. But so it is this pouring that is the act of worship. In the Vedic tradition, it's not like that. Or in a minor way also, you know, like you pour ghee into the fire or whatever, but still, the fire is essential. Now this fire worship, and there's a story to this. At around the time of the beginning of the Vedas, this fire worship was introduced. It didn't exist before.
Right.
You see, there were a few tribes in northwest India, the Druhyus, who are the ancestors of the Europeans, at least linguistically. So I'm a Druhyu. In fact, last year, my plane made a landing in Almaty in Kazakhstan, and I walked down the steps from the plane and I saw all these mountains around me and I said, wow, 5,000 years ago, my Druhyu ancestors passed here on the way from India to Europe. Wow. Anyway, so I'm a Druhyu. You people are Pauravas, or not even Pauravas. You see, the Pauravas lived on the Saraswati River. Many other Indian tribes lived beyond that. You know, the Andhras and the Tamils and so on. They're not Pauravas, even though they imbibed the Vedic culture later on. But originally the Vedic culture belongs to the Paurava tribe living in Haryana. And you have the Anawa tribe living in Kashmir and West Punjab and Himachal. And they are the ancestors of the Iranians. In the Vedas itself, you have a series of battles. Two are very important, the Battle of the Ten Kings and the Varshagira battle. The Battle of the Ten Kings takes place on the Ravi River, or the riverside of the Ravi River, which happens to be today the border between India and Pakistan. It was 5,000 years ago, the first Indo-Pak war, won by the Indian side, coincidentally. And then the Varshagira battle, that's when the Indians have won the first battle. And so the next battle is even farther west, just beyond the border of Afghanistan, beyond the Bolan Pass. And there the result is not so clear. It seems that the Vedic people have won the battle and they penetrate deeper into Afghanistan, but then ultimately they lose. And so the border is settled, India for the Vedic people and Afghanistan for the Avestan people. And then from there they spread farther west. Now, in the description of this battle, Vasishta says something about the religion of these people. Well, first of all, he says something about the ethnicity of these people. All the kings and all the tribes have Iranian names. It is really a miracle that all these scholars have translated this as the black aboriginals. You see, they're not black, they're not coming from the east or the south, they're coming from the west. So, it doesn't fit the scenario of the Aryan invasion at all. So these people are the Iranians, and their religion is also described, and it's clearly Zoroastrianism. You see, they are Anindra, they don't worship Indra. It's Adeva, they don't worship the Devas. And it is Ayajna, they don't bring fire sacrifice. Okay, that's exactly Zoroastrianism. Now, what's the story behind this? So, it is they who start fire worship. And it is the sage Bhrigu, who is one of them, who comes to settle among the Paurava tribe and who brings this fire worship. So around the time of the beginning of the very first Vedic hymns, you get this great ritual reform, the introduction of the yajna. However, it also evolves among the Iranians. The fire becomes so sacred that they don't throw things into it. So, you see, in the Vedic ritual, you throw things into the fire and then, the smoke takes it up to the gods. In Zoroastrianism, you don't do that. The fire is so sacred, you can't throw things into it. That's why they don't have cremation, because they don't want to soil the fire. Okay? But so that is described by Vasista. It's very clear we're dealing with the Iranians. And that this practice of divinizing the fire already exists. This is interesting because the second battle, which takes place like 2 generations after the first battle, that battle is known because it's described in the Vedas and also in the Avesta. Is the very first human event in history, 5,000 years ago, where we have 2 versions. You know, and so in the Avestan version, the same generals are described on the 2 sides. Only, you see, the Iranians, of course, they get a bit defeated, but so they put the accent on what comes later after the battle. And so after the battle, the Vedic people get defeated also. And so what happens after the battle is that they penetrate deep into Afghanistan. And then in the life of Zarathustra, it is described that on that occasion it is that these Vedic soldiers kill Zarathustra. Whether they killed him knowing that it was this priest, I don't know. That's not said. Maybe he was killed by accident or whatever. But so he lived at the time of this second battle. Yet, the practices typical of Zoroastrianism are already mentioned in the first battle. So they existed before Zarathustra. It's very interesting because in the science of religion, you always speak about the Zoroastrian reform. Well, actually, he didn't reform anything. He's only important because he was the first to put it in writing. He composed these hymns of the Avesta. So that's, you know, that's why he stayed. That's why his name is known. But so these religious practices are not his, they already existed. So the Anava tribe, from which the Iranians stem, lived side by side with the Paurava tribe, but so they were already religiously a little bit distinct. Largely the same, like their language is practically the same, but slightly different also. So from the Islamic viewpoint, they're at any rate idol worshippers, you know, or they call them fire worshippers. Or like the Germanic people who descend from the Druhius, I'm one of them, they are also called by the Arabs fire worshippers because they didn't use idols. Idols came from the Middle East, like the Greeks take them over, initially also didn't have them, take them over from Babylon and so on. Then the Romans take them over from the Greeks and so on. But so ultimately what counted for them was the fire worship. So this is typical for these 3 tribes, the Pauravas, the Anavas, and the Druhius. Most of India doesn't have it. Later they get it because they take over the Vedic tradition and they have Brahmins bring the Vedic tradition everywhere else in India. So you get the situation that kings in South India invite Brahmins, please come and settle here. They give them all kinds of, you know, tax benefits and so on. They give them these agraharas, special villages that are theirs. Why? Because they want to confer the prestige of the Vedic tradition onto their own dynasty, their own society. So that's why the Vedic tradition becomes universal in India. But so originally it wasn't there. So that which you find in the puja, that was there, that was everywhere.
And that's what is being evidenced in the genealogy, where I think, which actually defeats the principle of Aryan invasion, that the Vedic priest basically migrated. They migrated from Afghanistan area to the south. So that's where they could gene pool. That it did not go beyond Afghanistan or beyond.
Well, it did go beyond Afghanistan, but they mixed with everyone who was there. The language remained. Why? Because they had such cultural superiority. You see, they came among these, you know, let's put it in colonial terms. They came in Central Asia among these savages. And so when they mixed, it is their own culture that persisted. And so it's the others who took over their language, not the other way around. But so you see something similar in South India. The South Indian languages remained, although they were very influenced by Sanskrit. And so Brahminical culture became part of their lives. And so the oldest Tamil writings are already very, very influenced. You see the Dravidianist government in Chennai, tries to promote this idea of a pure Tamil culture, untainted by Brahmins and so on, but that doesn't exist. That may have existed 5,000 years ago, but long before there was writing there. By the time there is writing from about 500 BC, it's already strongly influenced by Sanskrit. The oldest Tamil grammar, Tolkappiyam, is clearly based on Sanskrit models. The first poetry book, the Tirukural, is like a Tamil version of the Shastras.
But how do you refute the point that Tamil is more ancient than Sanskrit?
That's not true. I mean, of course, every language is ancient. I mean, your parents spoke a language probably the same as the one you speak, and their parents spoke a language and so on. And, the whole history of mankind, people have been speaking something. And so, but if you go speak to your ancestors of 2,000 years ago, you probably won't be able to understand them.
Yeah.
So this ancient Tamil is already seriously different from modern Tamil. So you see, all languages are old. All languages are as old as mankind in the sense that they are the modern transformation of an older language, of an older language, of an older language. So in that sense, you see, Tamil is many thousands of years old, as is Sanskrit. It's not the one older than the other. However, you see, a criterion for distinguishing a language from, let's say, a dialect is that two languages are mutually non-understandable. All right? If you take two dialects of the same language, if you take, let's say, Marwari and Bhojpuri, they're both Hindi, they are more or less mutually understandable, right? Whereas Hindi and Tamil are not, okay? Now, if you take modern Tamil and ancient Tamil, already it's very hard for the two to understand each other, right? I mean, I've once taken some summer course of classical Tamil, and the one thing I remember, I forgot all of it, but one thing I do remember is that, they use this trilingual edition that was published by these Saivite monks in Hawaii, who published this paper, Hinduism Today.
Yeah.
Okay, so they published the Tirukural, the source text, ancient Tamil, modern Tamil, and English. And so, you don't even have to be able to read Tamil, but what you do notice is that the modern Tamil text is more than twice as long as the ancient Tamil text. So you see that Tamil itself has seriously changed. Now, and so I'm sure that right now Stalin or whoever in Chennai is not able to read the Tirukural in the original. Yet, you see, there are books of 2,000 and even 5,000 years old that some people can read, namely those in Sanskrit. Yep. Because Sanskrit has remained the same. Initially not. You see, Vedic Sanskrit compared to Paninian Sanskrit, there's still an evolution. It's still a living language. But then from Panini, Sanskrit gets frozen. And that's good, because that way the language remains useful. You see, the Buddhists, for example, they use the vernacular. The Buddha spoke in, his own language. And so his words get written down 300 years later in the Pali Canon, which was not the language of the Buddha, by the way. You see, that was a different dialect from Central India, not from Eastern India. And 300 years later, already in 300 years, the language changes. But so, at any rate, to use the vernacular proved to be not sustainable. Why? Because the language changes all the time. It changes through time, and it changes, of course, with geography. So the more Buddhism spread, the more there was a need to have a standard language. And then you see the monks can study this standard language and then translate whatever they know in the local language. So from then on, you get this Mahayana Buddhism, where they start using Sanskrit. And also all their ancient texts in Pali get translated into Sanskrit, because they need this Sanskrit. And it is the Sanskrit version that then goes to China, to Japan, and so on, where they don't know Pali, where they even the specialists, they know Fan Yu, which is Chinese for Brahmin language, which is Sanskrit. And so Sanskrit has remained the same. That's why you have forgeries, in Sanskrit, like you have the Vimana Shastra, the book about airplanes. And so it claims to be an ancient Sanskrit book. Actually, it was written in 1920 or so. But it's in pure Sanskrit, so it is the exact same language as Panini, because that's what everybody learns in India. There must be millions of people in India who can perfectly impersonate Panini. But so that's good. You see, that language is stable. That way everybody can use it. In medieval Europe, the scholars don't use Latin. Because no matter whether you were Welsh or German or Italian or so, you had a common medium that didn't change. The people who used it took care not to change it. So in that sense, I would say, no, it is Sanskrit that is very clearly older than Tamil. And that by now is the oldest language in the world. So it started about the same time as Sumerian, but so Sumerian is gone. Sumerian died out about 2000 BC, but then it was still kept alive for 2000 years in schools, just like you learn Sanskrit or Latin. People who spoke Akkadian or Hittite, they learned Sumerian, and they used the Sumerian script also, the cuneiform script. But so that's also gone already more than 2000 years. So it's only Sanskrit that really, soldiers on. So I'd say no, sorry for the Tamils, but... Yes.
Yes, Doctor, you talked about Sanatana Dharma, your positive outlook. You touched upon Islamic as well as missionary challenges. There is a third challenge, what I call is the leftist, secularist, communist, whatever you want to call. Can you touch upon that third challenge that Sanatana Dharma has? So that's part one of the question. Okay. The observation, the positive outlook you have, what do you say to the contrarian view where people are arguing with the facts that Bharat used to be such a big piece of land all the way from Afghanistan.
And it becomes smaller and smaller.
And has become smaller and smaller in last 1800 years.
Yeah. Well, let's start with that one, the difficult one. And you will have to remind me what the first one was. But so the second question, yes, it's true that Bharat is shrinking. You see, right now, in Kerala, there are 26% of the population that is Muslim, but among the newborns, 42% are Muslim. So the Muslim percentage is enormously growing. And so it will be Muslim majority within our lifetimes. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to quit India, but it might mean that. I mean, you see, if they find themselves in the majority, that may very much make their mentality more assertive, more militant. Yes. Now, that need not happen. Well, one thing one solution is that you all become Muslims. You see, Muslims are not against India. If you want Akhand Bharat, make it Akhand Pakistan. They'll be enthusiastic, a superpower, Islamic. So that's one solution.
But still fighting.
However, I think there's another solution, is to de-Islamize the Muslims. Now, that's something you can't do, it's something they'll have to do. But nevertheless, I think there are certain factors that favor this evolution. As I already said, there are problems from a scholarly viewpoint with Islam. You see, Islam believes a lot of things about itself that are not sustainable, that cannot survive the light of science. And to an extent, of course, people are capable of believing, of irrationally keeping up a belief, even though it, is criticized. But that's not infinite, At some point that will have to give way. And so I think this is already happening. And indeed, to come back to the example of Kerala, in Kerala there is a society of ex-Muslims. Mm-hmm. In most European countries today you have that also. You see, my own career as an Islam critic started with the Rushdie affair, 1988-89. When this book, The Satanic Verses, was banned, and when this fatwa, this death sentence was pronounced over Rushdie. Back then, all the leftist intellectuals supported him against the Ayatollahs. And all the Muslims sided against him. Now today that would be very different. All the leftist intellectuals would be on the side of the Ayatollahs.
Yeah.
They would say he's Islamophobic, But the other difference since then is that many Muslims or Muslim-born people okay, 5 more minutes. Okay, the difference is that now there are many ex-Muslims. There is a British Society of Ex-Muslims, probably there is a New York chapter of, ex-Muslims. In the Arab countries, it's not that far yet, but the existence of ex-Muslims is very much there. So I'm not sure that even Kerala will become majority Muslim. I'm fairly confident that India will not become majority Muslim. But, that's my assessment. It's difficult to predict the future. And it largely depends on what Hindus themselves do. You see, it has to do with the status of Hinduism. Very many people are status conscious. And so if they get indoctrinated in Islam, they think Islam is superior. Now, prove to them that Sanatana Dharma is superior. Now, this is difficult at the moment, because on the contrary, Hinduism is disparaged. In America, you have this terrible problem of, what is called Hindu phobia. And so in India, it's the same thing. You see, why do you have the phenomenon of sects of Hinduism who claim that they're not Hindus? You see, part of the reason is the legal advantages. You see, what perhaps people don't realize is that there are legal discriminations against Hinduism in India. Some people say, oh, this is impossible because they're the majority and so on. What about apartheid South Africa? It's perfectly possible to discriminate against the majority. So that ought to change. But so that's one reason why the Ramakrishna Mission, for example, in the 80s went to court to say, we want to be registered as a non-Hindu minority. But there's another reason. It's simply because Hinduism is disparaged all the time. Hinduism is a sinking ship. And so, I don't know if there are any Hindus here.
Very much so.
Yeah, well, in that case, you see, congratulations, because it proves that you're not rats. You see, rats are leading the sinking ship. And so that's why the Sikhs are saying, Hum Hindu nahi. And it's literally the case is in the British period. It's the British who made them into a separate religion. But so at that time, indeed, you see, there was a power above the Hindus. And so they, tried to be, to be in the good books of that superior power. So they took their distance from Hinduism. But so the same thing, like now, we recently had the recognition of the Veerasaivas as a minority. So, I mean, here now we are completely in the time when it's good to be non-Hindu. And so the ISKCON, for example, it depends, you see. Sometimes when they want to collect money from Hindus, they say that they are Hindus. But then elsewhere, where they can really speak freely, they say that they're not Hindus. And so, you have this problem that, Hinduism looks bad. And so, and so if that changes, if you tell the true story of Hinduism, if you, tell the true story about the research about all these scientific inventions of ancient Hindus and so on, if you say what is good about the Varna system rather than what is bad about it, and so on. If you give the true story of the place of caste in Hindu history, which originally wasn't there, in the Vedas it's never mentioned, and so on. I mean, if you give the pride, the proud story of Hinduism, then many people are going to turn around and say, well, yeah, I want to be part of it. Indeed, that's what anciently happened. You see, the Tamil kings wanted to become Vedic. That's why they brought in Brahmins to Vedicize their culture. Okay? So this can happen again, if there is a reason to be proud to be Hindu, then people are going to say, Hum Hindu, huh? Yeah? We are Hindus, we are the best Hindus. Then they're going to compete, to become more Hindu. So that's, I think, ultimately the solution. And you see, nowadays, this is becoming possible thanks to the new technology. You can reach everyone all the time. In the old days, you see, if you wanted to, let's say in a Christian circle, you wanted to, as a teenager, you heard about some book criticizing Christianity, but, to bring it home, risking that your father would find it and so on, was all. And now you see all these problems are gone. You say one mouse click and you have the whole story. So in that sense, and I guess with that I'll have to wind up. But so, this is a rather positive message. Things turn out to happen in a sense that is favorable to Hinduism. Even though Hindus don't seem to have any merit in it, nevertheless it happens and it favors Hinduism. So perhaps you see all these pujas that Hindus do, these temples that they build and the dollars they put in the hundi and so on. Maybe they have some subtle effect, And indeed, that's what the Purvamimamsa philosophy says. There is a secret mechanic, that starts with the sacrifice you make, and then it goes through the atmosphere, and tomorrow, you have made a sacrifice to win the battle. Okay, tomorrow on the battlefield, somehow this secret mechanic comes down and you win the battle. Or whatever you pray for, restoring health or, whatever. So maybe somehow, you see, Hinduism is bound to win because it manages the, subtle energies in a good sense. Yes.
Thank you. No, actually, I was told to that we have a snacks, we have light snacks in downstairs. So after this session, if you want to go downstairs and have some little snacks, You're welcome. And with that said, I want to thank you, Dr. Conrad Elst. It was a very scintillating discussion. It was very thought-provoking, and you made it quite interactive. And I had a couple of questions I want to ask myself, but I think time is of essence here. I hope that we will get to have you more in future. I'm not sure if you visit New Jersey quite often. We would like to see you. I think there are a couple of people here they were very much interested in continuing this beyond this. So we want to touch up on a couple of subjects in future if you
All right.
let us know. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you for all my